start. We are born again. Open your heart. Spend this time in your head.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Round 2 with Dr. Boz. I'm so excited. Oh, thank you so much for coming back and visiting again.
Great to be on your show again, Amy. I'm so thankful for all of the people that you have influenced and that you have been teaching. That I really do find that when you connect with people that are in that same grain of really lifting awareness for everybody they love and care about, it's a multiplier that doesn't follow math. It's so amazing to see the impact that they have. So congratulations on doing such a great job over the last several months and weeks and months.
Thank you so much. I could not even begin to share how many lives it has impacted. And so many people have said, you know, I started with Dr. Boz, just like me, and then I kind of got lost. So they're coming back. We're going back to basics, and we're getting back to ketosis.
It's real that there are many people that, even just in Grandma Rosa's story, that you start and then you kind of lose focus in a way that isn't just metabolically, but you feel better. And so, and then if you say, well, the next layer, when you come back around, we'll go to the next step. And I'm still here.
I love it. And I'm so glad that you're there and that you've been doing this for so long that you can help, and you've been helping so many people. You can help us kind of wade through the confusion, because we've heard a lot of things since going low carb. And now there's a lot of us who are very worried because we're confused about the things we've been told before. And I'm finding that things are different in ketosis. We're told, for example, you have to have lots and lots of protein or you're going to lose muscle and you're going to lose hair. But I believe that that's different in ketosis. So can you put us at ease? Can you tell us how much protein we actually need every single day before we start losing muscle and losing our hair and all of that other fun stuff?
Well, I'll tell you that question comes up a lot. So you're not alone. It is a recurring question of people who have plenty of knowledge, and especially in the traditional path of a high insulin state. They are right. This is a wasting equation if they don't have enough protein. But when I have been in this space of the keto journey, that really I call it the continuum, because not everybody needs to take it to the highest levels of ketosis. But most people that come into an internal medicine clinic are going to have to end up at least at those higher ends of therapeutic levels before we revert or have a chance of reversing and really undoing what years of a high insulin state did. So as you enter into the first wave of keto, that time where people come into the ketogenic space, or maybe they hop right into carnivore, and because they are entering with a body's chemistry that is high in insulin, their system has different rules, and they shift the ketones, or they, high fat, low carb, and they are in a bath of ketones, and it's amazing. They feel great. They have better energy. Their brain begins to sleep better. Tiny little things are healing that they didn't even know were going wrong. And as they ride that wave of chemistry, and I encourage you to ride the wave of chemistry, because you can eat pretty much whatever they want. They can have, as long as it's got high fat, low carb. I don't even chirp about all the other things that come later in the story of educating people. And I don't talk about protein. I just say you should have mostly fat and put your fat on protein, because when you're counting total carbohydrates, you'll quickly learn that 20 total carbohydrates per day is low. It's very low. So they're like, what do you just eat? A spoonful of butter? I'm like, well, no, but you could dip your ribs in butter. You can dip the lobster in butter, and you can do, meaning easy to get the fat in, and it tastes amazing. Again, resurrecting a chemistry set of especially fat-based hormones that are usually suppressed or tucked into fat cells because of years of insulin. And then we move into a stage where their chemistry gets better. Their daily production of ketones will start to decrease. Sometimes even their urine ketone strips don't show a state of ketosis anymore. And so they start to do things like, oh, eat more fat, eat more fat, eat more fat. And where I've looked kind of, at first that'll work, but where I really start to say, all right, this is where we start to shift some of the guidance of how do we do this for a lifetime? How am I, 5 years into 6, whatever I'm into this, and what's the steady level look that each week or each month, a little bit of health is improved because habits get a bit easier to do. And it is in that protection of really stimulating a stress inside the human body, which sounds like the last thing, like I'm under chronic stress, I don't sleep enough, my cortisol's high, my adrenal glands are low, my gut leaks, all of the things that when they have been in a high insulin state and you start to guide them in a direction and then say, well, we're going to start pulsing stress into your life. And as you fast forward in some of the treatment plans where they go all the way to these extended fasts or do things that I think are, first of all, not necessary to get the results, but they're not sustainable. Meaning I'm going to do 14 days fasting and I'm going to do it, every month. I'm like, no, you shouldn't do that. Instead, let's ease your metabolism along this continuum. And each time you do a stress of that metabolism and march a little further into this space that has more stress than the previous set of metabolic states, we see a surge of those ketones again and a improvement in their energy. The weight loss returns. And that keto continuum is a little longer to explain than the protein thing, but I'm going to circle back to say one of the most important studies that it was actually a team here in Tampa that did the study. They're called ASPI, ASPI, and it's called Applied Science for Performance Institute. So they were looking at athletes to say, how well can you help us measure or protect their bone or their muscle breakdown? So when you have you seen this study?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And you look at these really intense athletes, they're trying to build muscle. They care a lot about muscle. And there's actually a product that is in your urine when you are using muscle as nutrients, when they're breaking down muscle for energy. And so we do not want to see that in the urine of people who are trying to build muscle. We also don't want to see that I wouldn't want that in my urine. I wouldn't want that in my elders I would be worried about muscle wasting. And we can watch them enter into a healthy state of ketosis without muscle breakdown when we follow a couple of important rules. And those are, you should have ketones in circulation. So when you first see those folks with that wave of ketogenic state come into ketosis, and I like to think of it as the novice coaches for keto say, yeah, just do these rules. And yes, you will have success for the first season. But one advantage about being in the long game of health, which is where internists are supposed to be chronic disease managers, meaning if I can prevent a problem that you never know about, that's a win. It's just a very ungrateful place to be because papers is like, well, I didn't have that problem. I'm like, I know, that's what happens when we do our job right. This is a total place where that is appreciated, that if I'm looking for what is the secret sauce for protecting muscle breakdown, it is the presence of ketones in circulation. So when they have that first wave of chemistry improvement and the ketones are high, it's actually a state where the energy burned inside their mitochondria is decoupled. It's not following the standard rules that insulin energy would have followed. And you see it and you hear it all over social media. You hear it, anybody who's like, oh my gosh, these ketones are amazing. And their brain's on fire and their energy's high and they're just leaving weight as they walk down the street, they're losing weight. And it is because these mitochondria are burning energy in a mismatch for what has standard, body energy expenditure. And then it resets. And then it goes back to the normal rules unless you stress it. And this is where I would push patients to then, move to keto continuum number 2 or 3 and 4, and then take that eating window and put it inside these hours of eating. And, you know, when you're at this stage, you'll know that your metabolism is working by being able to measure that you are putting ketones in circulation and that your glucose is coming down. And, you know, in the scientific literature, we call this the glucose ketone index, GKI. In my people, we do lazy math. We take the big number, divide by the little number, and call it the Dr. Boz ratio. And we really want that Dr. Boz ratio to at least be lower than 100 for people to lose weight. But when we look at really guarantee, I mean, that's just the basic threshold that when I see people at 100, about 80% of them are losing weight when they get below 100. But when I'm looking at folks who are really trying to reverse inflammatory problems or autoimmune problems, you got to stress their system so that that ketone glucose numbers give you a Dr. Boz ratio of 40 or less. And you want to find that every day. You want to find a way to push that, or most days of the week. I mean, perfection really is the enemy of good, and we just need to be good for most of these health days to get these to reverse. But when I have patients come to me and say, how much protein should I eat? I weigh this much and my ideal body mass is this, and here's my kilograms. How many grams of protein should I eat? The first question I ask is, doesn't matter as much as what is your chemistry set doing in recent days. And that is something you can measure. You do not need my help for this. It's a point of care test. Prick your finger, look at your glucose, look at your ketones. And that Dr. Boz ratio of at least being able to pulse a stress of 40 or less for that Dr. Boz ratio, and then ride the wave, meaning your body will be in this chemistry set until it resets. And what I see people doing is they will stress their body, they'll feel good, and then they'll try to go to these next levels, somehow needing to tick down the list. Like, I want to be the best and I want to be the greatest. I'm like, no, just hang on. That's a great wave to ride. And if you do not need to pulse any higher on that metabolic scale, because your health is actually better than they give it credit for. I mean, you know, most of the time they come into the clinic or they come into our consultations and they've just suffered so long that they believe their body is, you know, permanently broken. And then when we start to resurrect that it's going to work okay, I tell them, don't push any harder than you have to. And it's usually because in that setting of, you know, expanding the stress in their body. So it's called hormesis, where you push the body to produce hormones at a peak level, and then don't over push, and you got to push enough to get the results. So there's this space. And if you gently stay in that zone, wow, you can map this out in an outcome that it's reproducible again and again. So you hear me not answering the question of protein, because when they go all the way to protein and they're overeating, or they have this obsession of becoming, do you know what foie gras is?
No.
So foie gras is when you have goose liver. And the geese are, don't ever Google this, the geese are fed high fat, and they just consume so much fat that their liver swells up, and then they are slaughtered, and then they have a high priced liver that's sold for liver pate. And so I tell patients sometimes when they're just saying, I just need to eat so much fat, so much fat, so much fat, that I'm like, you're headed for foie gras. I mean, you're eating so much fat, you forgot to check that there's a little science behind what we're doing here. And that is, what is your blood sugar doing? What is your ketones doing? And you can push people right out of a therapeutic zone because they just get in their mind, I have to do this. I have to do this. This is what worked before. I'm like, well, that was a different chemistry set. And we've slid you along that pendulum of health, that continuum of health. And here's the new plan. And we're going to do this for a couple of weeks, and I need you to check your numbers. And if the numbers aren't good enough, then we have to make some adjustments. And I just think once you do not need to see a doctor to figure this out. You might need a workbook. And that's where I push people to say, get the workbook. It's cheaper than me, way cheaper than me. And it's exactly what I do with patients in the clinic, that we are walking through a process. And that process is reproducible. It's especially reproducible if you're doing it with a friend or a husband or somebody else that is looking to heal. So long answer to say, I'm not answering that question because it's more about the chemistry set that they're in relative than this hard standard number that you should have this much protein and then you're done speaking.
I just did a video the other day and I said the same thing. I was like, go by your numbers. They're like, in our group, because we're mostly coming from carnivore. Carbs, whatever. There is no such thing as 20 carbs for most of us. We haven't touched that in years.
Perfect.
But nobody's in ketosis, and they can't understand how no one's in ketosis. And that's where the protein thing is coming from. And they're like, but protein doesn't raise, that doesn't make any sense. So now we're beginning to learn about gluconeogenesis, and too much protein is in fact going to kick you or keep you out of ketosis.
Yes.
And so now I've got some people that are like, well, can I just eat 30 grams of protein a day? And I'm like, please no. Let's try to find the highest amount that you can have and still be in ketosis.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, it is truly like you've just threaded the needle for what most patients really have a tough time navigating. And as soon as they comprehend that we're gonna make a plan, and you're gonna be able to test the plan in real time, how are you doing? And for one person, it may work. For one season of your life, it may work. And then we get to see how well your body holds that plan as far as reversing some of those medical problems, really staying in a state that is, again, the reason why that's so important. And I think Dr. Gundry does a really good job of explaining that a mitochondria is this place for energy. It is where energy is made. And when it is under the ruling of a high insulin state, it is our traditional model that was right. Calories in, calories out. You've got to stick to that equation. It is when we uncouple it, we unlock the mitochondria from the rule book. And now we have this mitochondria which is in a state of ketosis. It is burning a ketone, and it's very wasteful. It overproduces energy in the worry that there isn't fuel coming, there isn't carbs coming. And it's in that protective zone that when that mitochondria is burning ketosis, you get these incredible benefits of not only did the study of the athletes, how are they able to predict who broke down muscle and who wasn't? It was strictly related to the amount of days spent in a ketogenic state versus not. And when they were not in a state of ketosis, they did, in fact, break down muscle as a consequence for what they were, even though they were eating more calories than, or equal calories to the ones that were in the other arm of the study. Those that were in a ketogenic state, those that were eating either MCTs or fats or goat cheese, whatever, to keep those ketones high, or they were keeping their eating window in a zone that really pushed the body to stress so that it was in a state of ketosis outside of the hours of eating. All of that equation led to no muscle breakdown as long as ketones stayed in circulation. And that's an easy pattern to follow. Thank God bless them for doing that research so that we can have the confidence of saying, I didn't have this confidence even 4 years ago. It's as more of these studies come out, we're say, I think this is the way it works, but we got to wait. And then people like the ASPE Institute do a great job of feeding us the information we're looking for.
Yeah, I have so many people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s that are like, I can't reduce my protein that much. I'm going to lose muscle. And I'm trying to help them understand in ketosis, it's a different ballgame. Everything is so different. So hopefully that will give a lot of people the confidence to go ahead and lower your protein down. It's not the same as it was in standard American diet.
Do you know how I have that conversation when I'm guiding somebody is I tell them to stop focusing on the food and we're going to focus on your eating window. And again, it becomes this very easy to see equation when they say, all right, now your eating window is 6 hours a day, and I want you to stay there for 2 weeks. And how do we know if it's right? I want you checking morning ketones and glucose to see what is your Dr. Boz ratio when you wake up in the morning. And when they take that eating window and it's slid too late at night, or there is so much volume of food that goes into that time when they eat, their numbers don't look like they're not in a state of ketosis. Mm-hmm. And as they start to say, well, let's shave off an hour of that time, and they find an eating window that still fits in their life. I think this is the artful part of this science is you take a mom who has to make supper and has 4 kids, under the age of 15 that you're cooking for, and that meal where she's, predominantly in charge, we're asking her not to eat becomes really difficult. It's not impossible, but it's not the first step out of the gate. We find a way to get that eating window into a 4-hour window or whatever it is that she can handle, and then stay there. And then watch what happens if you slide it just a little bit earlier. And then you go a little bit earlier. And then there's this magical moment where it's in that zone where she gets satiated. She feels full. She's eating, the food that's, tastes great. And the next morning, her ketones are up and her glucose is down. And this is where that slow improvement starts to happen. And once they find that zone, I'm like, now stay there. And you'll know when it's time to go out because your numbers will not be there anymore. But I've seen it last for 2-3 years. And each week it's a little bit better. And it's the kind of improvement as an internist you want to see: steady, slow, stable improvement. And it also is a zone where they're addressing issues like why do they want food late at night after the kids go to bed? Oh, it's how I feel good. Oh, it's how I comfort. And that emotional side of eating it's important to address that in the greater package of helping people. That checking numbers and being very scientific and the latest research gets everybody excited. Like, oh, I need to follow, this is the new study. And on my channel, I really try not to interview experts. I have a few friends where I enjoy having them on my channel, but for the most part, I want to hear from what are patients struggling with and what does their story look like in translation. And then, as much as I am a little nerd about the studies, I find that there's plenty of people on the internet that review these studies and go through them. What I have been found the greatest reward is what psychological development are we in need of for this patient to succeed. Why is it that they are comforting at night? What is it about the soothing cup of ice cream that they have at night that is filling a void? And there is no prescription that fixes that. It is relationships. It is that that mind, body, spirit that is debunked in lots of medicine. Like, okay, yep, we know that's important, and we learned that in medical school, but then we got to the place where we taught one another what prescription to write, what lab test to order, what diagnosis to have, what questions to, how do we manage the person, and that the spirit gets left behind. And I contend you'll never fix this eating problem called, high insulin states, insulin resistant, without addressing some of the psychological reasons that we eat and being a space that you can discuss that.
Yeah, Emily and I are doing a workshop right now, and one of the things that we're addressing is mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And how important that is to get it right, because you can lose 100 pounds and then you can gain it right back again.
It's so sad, because that process of that slow, steady improvement that I was talking about, it isn't as sexy, but you know what? They last. And I can look back at my medical career, and internal medicine is what I've done, chronic disease management, that journey of walking patients through, high blood pressure, cholesterol, thyroid disease, there's plenty of textbooks written on that. But when I put the tapestry of patients together, I really enjoy finding peak brain performance for my patients. And as you look at what that journey has led to, there's still a very important space in medicine that if you really want the best outcomes for a diabetic, they can't be depressed and they need to be sleeping well. This mental health side of development becomes, what is their relationships like? And if they are void of healthy relationships, if they have no example what it looks like for other people to practice grace, they can lose the weight. I can show you how to do that, but it doesn't stay off. The best outcomes are that slow, steady change while you're working on the relationship side of being human.
Oh my goodness, so much of that, it just rings so true. It's so much more than diet.
Oh yeah, like that's easy. It's the human messy part.
Right? This a little bit. Well, we'll finish up with the diet part of things real quick. So can you explain for people who don't understand, how does too much protein stop ketosis?
Right. So when you look at let's just do the consumption of food in general. So most of the people are going to talk about anybody who's been more than 5 pounds overweight for more than a year, which to me is the whole universe. I don't know if I've met them that they haven't been. And we looked at what was their response to insulin when they consumed food. And all of the patients were put into the same study. They were going to be rotated through 3 different stages of eating. And they put the food into the body while they had metrics looking at what did their insulin levels do and what did their glucose do. There were several other things they measured, but we're going to focus on those 2 for this part of the explanation. So when they put the patients into the first section, they were in a glucose or carbohydrate heavy eating. And the eating was particle sizes that were pulverized. They were really tiny particle sizes. And so because of that, processed food is really what that is. It shot that glucose up and shot the insulin up as high as, I mean, that's the highest measurement we could find. And then we pulverized protein and we put them in the same patients and had a washout period. They went for a week, did something different, come back in, and now we're doing the same test for several days in a row. What happens when we put these patients with just protein? And by golly, it shot their glucose up and it shot their insulin up. Now, it wasn't as high as the carbohydrate, but especially in an insulin-resistant patient, it was enormous. It was way too high. It took about as long to get the glucose back to what it was for, in a normal range. The carbohydrate consumption was just a much higher change in what those glucose and insulin were. And then finally, they came in the third section of the trial was to pulverize fat. And so they ate predominantly fat and measured these same things. And again, glucose went up and so did the insulin. Now, it was about 1/5 as high as the carbohydrate team. And it was about that the protein was about 3 times higher than what that the fat was. So the fat was the least stimulating for both a glucose circulation. Again, they didn't eat the glucose. This is just what was found in circulation. And then what was the insulin response for that? And so you look at our insulin resistant bodies and they're doing naughty things behind the scenes, especially the stimulus of how much your body thinks it needs for insulin production once you eat. And it's for that reason that when you look at the keto continuum, which is the roadmap I use to say, not everybody needs to go to the most advanced level of the ketogenic diet. But if you're looking for where you're at, you can check yourself along the way and see where you stabilize and then move along further if you need to have further improvements. But one of those sections where we talk about, you don't get to chew anything outside of these 8 hours. And that includes gum. That includes anything outside of salt and water. Nothing goes outside of those 8 hours. And it's because of data like this, where it says that would not normally happen in a healthy 30-year-old who's training for a triathlon. Oh, that's not my patient. And that's not the people who are looking to reverse medical problems on a ketogenic diet. They reverse medical problems because they're looking for the ketogenic diet because they have a mountain of medical problems. Some of them they don't even know yet. They're lucky and haven't come to get me to stamp it on their chart, but it is in the brewing. It is in the process of happening. And if you can look at one of 2 predictors that I ask patients to do, which are now both point of care. One is to follow your uric acid. Again, that is a point of care test, much like glucose or ketones. You can check that on your own. Don't check it once. I highly encourage you to check it 2 or 3 times. That's why the strips come in, I think, sets of 5 or 10. And the second thing is what is your average blood sugar? That when you want to see the crop of problems come along, it doesn't show up overnight. It shows up, several trips around the sun where you, like every American, has been eating processed food, more processed food than we think we're eating, more often than we admit we're eating. But your cells keep track. They keep the score. And when we look at those responses of how much insulin is being stimulated in an insulin resistant patient, it is not hard to believe it, but it is that same mismatch of, oh, this isn't a healthy patient we're studying. This is an insulin resistant patient. And because of that, even though they're eating all protein and it's not supposed to spike my glucose, but it does. And I'm eating all protein, it's not supposed to spike my insulin, but it does. And it happens as a result of what your body's been going through for years before you get to the point where we're saying, oh, let's use a ketogenic diet to reverse this. And I contend the only way you reverse it is to check your numbers.
Yes. And a lot of our people, a lot of the carnivores, we've been doing this long enough that we're like, yeah, I'm getting the blood meter, I'm checking my ketones. And some people are just having the worst time getting into ketosis. They cannot get their blood sugar to come down in the morning, and they cannot get their ketones up, and they don't understand why. These are carnivores. So generally my first recommendation is drop the protein down a little bit and up the fat. What would you say?
First thing I'd do is shut the window. I mean, get that window to 6 hours. And once that 6 hour window, 8 hours and 7 hours and 6 hours, but really kind of get to 6 hours. And then I would really push to move it away from sunset, like put the eating in the daylight hours. It is because you have such a high metabolic churn happening during the day that's when you should put the calories in to burn. If you are starting the calories at sunset, your body's not healthy enough for that. That is great if you're a caveman who went out hunting for lions today, but that's not you. You're overweight and you've been there for a while, and we're trying to reverse. The sunset hours are not for eating in your zone. And then if I have that mom who says, I've got my eating window down to 4 hours, I'm still having morning glucoses that are elevated and ketones that are in the toilet. I said, you got to add fasting once a week. And we don't say the word fasting until they get to 36 hours with only black coffee and water. I don't ask them to do that on the first fast. Usually the first few fasts, I tell them to have bone broth or MCT or exogenous ketones. And all of those are fine ways to fast. But if they can't get ketones to show up with that kind of limitation in their eating, then I get to a strict fast. And I've had a few patients who are carnivore that are doing everything right. And I'm like, if you check an A1C, I mean, I think you are aware that you can now do that point of care. You do not need the doctor, order it on your own. That company that really has supported this is out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is where I practiced for 20 years. So I highly support them for doing this test and getting it to market, because you need to know this number. It's a great way to look at your average blood sugars. And I don't care if you get it from me or the person that in Sioux Falls, but that A1C shows you your average blood sugars. And when you can see that start to creep, it is time to either move along the continuum, to tighten up some of the bad habits that we all find ourselves doing, and then measure. I've had a few carnivores where I couldn't get their numbers down until they got to the 72-hour fast. It took us 6 fasts. The first fast was 36 hours. The second one was 36 hours. The third one was supposed to be 36 hours, and they accidentally made it to 48. That's always a good sign. And so they're feeling good. They've got this skill of fasting down, but their morning numbers are still elevated. And so I'm like, you got to stretch to 72, and bam, that's where they lower it. You could just see that it just took that long. If I could have a continuous glucose monitor and a continuous ketone monitor, you can just see that it just took that long for their body to say, okay, now we can start to do what you're asking us to do. Now we can uncouple that mitochondria from the insulin's dictatorship, if you would.
Right? Yeah. Most of the people that I work with, I tell them, I'm like, let's drop your protein down, because most of them have been eating like a 2-to-1 protein to fat. And I'm like, let's start with this. Let's drop your protein down. So we do the 1 gram to 1 kilogram of ideal body weight, unless they were, there's a 200 club for carbs. I think that there should be a 150 club for protein.
Okay.
A little bit of a slower shift, because some of them have a really hard time making it. But as soon as they get that protein down and they get their fat up, immediately they're able to do it. And so because we've been checking carbs and protein and fat for so long, it's natural for us to go to our macros first before we end up doing the fasting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and do you ever see them gain weight in that season?
Yes, actually, that was one of my next questions is, why do I feel so bad and why am I gaining weight?
Right. So again, when I see them starting to monkey with the protein, like, oh, I got to cut the protein, I got to cut the protein. Yeah, you can do that and you can get results, but usually they're cutting the protein and adding the fat, and that is a higher calorie amount. And often we don't talk about calories on this diet because you are in an uncoupled state. Your ketones are high and your glucose is lower than it was. That means insulin has improved. Insulin is lesser than it was 2 weeks ago. So when that's the state, when they're in a ketogenic state, that uncoupled doesn't follow the rules of calorie in, calorie out. But as soon as that metabolism levels off, now we are back to counting calories. So what I've seen is they get really intense about, I got to lower the protein, and they're right, lowering the protein would be helpful. And then they start replacing it with fat. And although that does replace it, a better strategy would have been to shorten the window and move it out at sunset. Let them eat what they want. That satiation of feeling good, as long as it's in that window, and now move it sooner, and now move it sooner. That I've seen people who really took their beautifully resurrected metabolism, and because they kept sprinkling protein throughout the day, they just kept eating less and less and less and less and less. And then they gained weight. I mean, the weight came back. I'm like, you need to get out of the insulin dictatorship, which means shorten that window, move it towards sunrise, and then go without, do a fast. And those are going to be not just one time in your life and then you're done. It's really something you've got to do with rhythm. So finding that comfort where they have enough protein that they feel satiated, and then the types of fat become really important at that stage too, where it wasn't so much. I mean, I'm a beef farmer and hog farmer's daughter. It's not that they take away meat or any carnivore, but in that setting, if they added some goat, goat being high in medium chain triglycerides, like feta cheese with their meat, it's a really rich way to keep the fat high, but especially the kind of fat that has the most high abundant output for ketones. And man, that's like a magic fix when they're in that zone of saying, I don't want to lower my protein. And then they fight you. And then they're like, the sad part is if you can't get buy-in from the patient, then they either quit or they cheat or they hide it. And so you really want to try to find a way to satiate them. And so I shift the fats to as much goat stuff as they'll let me. And then even supplementing with MCT is fine. But then also shift it out of the darkness and then get them to fast.
There's so far about 10% that have done that have gotten hungry, that have not been able to feel satiated, that have begun to gain weight. The other 90%, as soon as they drop their protein lower, they're like, my brain opened up.
Yeah.
Heavens opened. I feel fantastic. But then there's this 10% that's going, why isn't it working? So, and that's one of the things I try to present a whole lot of options for people to pick and choose. Because there's some that are like, no, I'm not going to lower my protein. I'm not going to eat that much fat. Like you said, patient buy-in is a big part of it. So now I've got this other, tool, this other path that we can try taking that will help immensely. And
yeah, well, and it truly is that you did the right thing. Lowering the protein, sometimes it's this tiny little sliver of amount that, they're right on the edge of the benefit. So those are the patients where you don't want to cause them any more pain than they need to. You want them to ride this chemistry wave as long as possible, because the healing is still real at a cellular level, but you're going to know it. They'll feel good. And that ketones are high and glucose goes down, especially when you start to watch that, there is a gluttony to protein consumption. And that is maybe because we deprive people from this for too long, but in that just slight numbers that improve it. So I really think that more people need to hear what you're saying. And I wish, let's hope people listen to this, because that is exactly what needs to happen.
Yes, exactly. And I honestly believe, probably very unpopular opinion, I think that for a lot of us carnivores, we've replaced carbs with protein.
Oh, yeah. The real crux of all of this journey is we all have a relationship with food. Mm-hmm. And if that relationship has sometimes elevated beyond all of our other relationships in life. And if that's you, somewhere along this journey, you're going to have to deal with that. And we hope that it's in a place where your brain is healthier and there's been ketones around for hopefully a year. And then you're going to have the true onion layers pulled back about why is food such a comfort for you, and how can you displace that with other places in your life, whether it's acts of service, whether it's that continuous practice of grace for yourself as much as for others. And that is that's not on the prescription path. That is in a journey with people that can model that behavior for you and then reward you when you do it well.
Back to that mindset again.
Mm-hmm.
So the other big question that people really want to know, some of my people, like I said, 90% of them are able to get into great ketosis. Their Dr. Boz ratio is below 40, but they're not losing weight. So what's wrong? Do we need to rush it? They've only been in ketosis for like a week or two, but they want to know why they aren't losing weight at a Dr. Boz ratio of 40.
Yeah, that early wave, there's a lot of shifting going on. So if they have reset and they've got that nice, and you're talking about Dr. Boz ratios first thing in the morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that is the key. And I've been working on some curriculum for an advanced audience of people that are struggling with exactly what you're talking about. And so I have several patient charts and several patient data points that show what is glucose doing, what are ketones doing at different stages of stress on the body. And it is critical that when you see the map of what's happening with metabolism through this patient data, and then you extrapolate out to a patient telling you, yeah, my morning glucose used to be in the 70s or 80s, and then I got better at keto and wasn't looking for a while, and now I'm back to checking and my blood sugar's back up to 95, and I can't seem to get the ketones high enough. And that is a state that says, yes, you still have that cortisol wave in the morning that's much higher than you think it is, and there's several steps that do need to be improved to reverse that. They will lose weight in a zone, even when their Dr. Boz ratio isn't great in the morning, as long as they're stressing weight loss, they're having a good surge of that ketone glucose during the day, but that will not last for long. When your morning numbers aren't showing a state of ketosis and a really controlled glucose, and I mean 80 or less in the morning, you'll struggle to lose weight long term. You may lose it short term, and that's where people get this hype of saying, I've been on the keto diet and my numbers look great in the morning for the last 14 days. I'm like, give me a little more data. You're right. They'll ride a wave of that chemistry shift, and most people do lose weight. But it's after that the body will stabilize. And what happens that morning, Dr. Boz ratio goes back up again. And that's when finding a way to get the glucose down and the ketones up is all these little bitty steps of saying, you don't have to hop to 72-hour fast, people, but you do need to cut down some of these, whether that's decrease the protein, whether that's decrease the window, whether that's move it out of, away from sunset. All of that enhances and stresses that body just enough to decouple the mitochondria, which is when they will get back to that weight loss stage.
That's what I'm waiting to see how long my body can ride the wave.
Right. And you're doing great, because it's a couple months you've been doing this, right?
I know. This is 9.5 weeks ago was when we first recorded. I got off I gotta tell you, I got off the recording and you were like, you're probably not in ketosis. I'm just saying. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to go find my keto mojo and I'm going to take my numbers and I'm going to prove you wrong. And I checked my numbers. My blood sugar in the middle of the day was like 97 and my ketones were 0.3. And I was like, well, okay, stuck my foot in my mouth on that one. And the next day I switched over and I started, doing it. So it's been 9.5 weeks and my numbers are absolutely fantastic. And people ask me, well, what continuum are you on? And I'm like, I'm on like 1. Because I drink a fatty coffee in the morning and then I drink another fatty coffee after that. And then I have lunch and then I have dinner and then I have a fatty bedtime tea.
So perfect. And when they're in a state of that they truly are resurrecting what we know are those fat-built hormones. This is where cortisol, is exhausted after years of not sleeping well on a high insulin diet, and their adrenals are fatigued. But that means their cortisol overall is low in their body, and so is their testosterone, and so is their estrogen, and so is their vitamin D. all of these are built from fat. And when they're in that zone of feeling, of adding as much fat as you just talked about there, and they're in a ketogenic state and they feel well, then don't change anything. I would love to go back to that stage. It was beautiful. But as your body heals, there will be a stage where the next step will be necessary, or at least a slight improvement in some of those steps. But dang, I wouldn't touch that.
I'm riding the wave. I'm just going to stick with it. There was one other question that a lot of people are starting to come with, and it's a little concerning for them. How low is too low on your glucose? For example, the other morning I woke up and I took my Dr. Boz ratio. Just when I woke up in the morning, my glucose was 51 and my ketones were 4.2. Of course, I felt perfectly fine, no issue, but a lot of people see that 51 and they start to panic. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, that is pretty much anybody in the medical world that's been trained said, oh, that's got to be too low. Give them a, D550. That process of a brain functioning on a glucose of 50 is not something it could do overnight. It's a reflection that you've really been stressing your brain to use ketones when they need to, and then that abundant production of ketones, over 4, whatever you said it was, very nice and robust. I mean, you win. That's a great sign. So when I look, one of the colleagues that I love bantering with is Dr. Lustig, Rob Lustig, and he takes care of kids, pediatric endocrinologist, and is just a wealth of information. But as you talk to him about things like, oh, is there a hemoglobin A1C or an average blood sugar that's too low? And of course, he will say yes. What if their blood sugar gets down to 50? And I'm like, you aren't anywhere near this internal medicine side of things, because when they get to be about 15, you send them to me for the lifetime of their problem. And so it just shows you we think about the stages that patients are at differently. And then when you get past the noise of what is the candid answer, he's like, oh yeah, as long as they're producing a robust amount of ketones, and that this isn't just an acute flip of, oh, their glucose has been in the 80s, 90s, 100s, and then suddenly they went down to 50 one day. They'll go down to 50 when you stress them, when they've been fasting, when they didn't have supper late at night, or when they added, when they changed the stress inside their system. So, I mean, I've had mine at 45. But it's always in a time where I'm either extending my fast or I'm stressing my system, and that gluconeogenesis usually hangs out between that, high 40s would be up to, so think of 50s and 60s is where, when the glucose is in gluconeogenesis, that's a sign that you've emptied out the storage. Good job. You did that at least one time in life. And now they'll eat again and it'll fill back up again. And then they need to keep doing that routinely to reverse medical problems.
Yeah. So we've talked about the number that's too low. Now, is there a ketone number that is too high? Because I've heard anything under 10 is technically okay, but I wanted to hear from you.
Right. So you look at when a patient is in need of real medical advice, like not just a ketone. I mean, a ketogenic diet is lovely, but when you look at where most doctors have that panic button for a ketogenic crisis, it's because they don't have insulin around to move glucose out of the serum space or the external cell space and inside a cell. So the glucose goes up, but the glucose goes up in your finger sticks or in the measurements, but it's because inside the cell the cell is starving. It cannot get any glucose, and as a result, your body will produce a boatload of ketones. So when people are in that first wave of a ketogenic state, you can see some ketones like 6 or 5, or it's just like a whoosh of ketones, 8 even I've seen. Yep. And though short term, those aren't the problem. You're going to pee them out. You're going to have them available for your body, and then you're going to pee them out. Where I start to warn patients is if you've got glucoses north of 200 and you have ketones that are higher than 6, 7, 8, and those are the places where you start to say, in a high glucose, high ketone state, you should be driving or getting somebody to get you to an emergency room. Something's going on. But when they've got glucoses where they've been struggling with their blood, their diabetes or prediabetes, and their sugars are, 150, nothing to write home about, not better, but not terrible. And they are just recently on the ketogenic diet. A wave of ketones will bathe over them, and you do see them ranging in that single digits, but south of 10, and and they feel good. So to me, when I look at the panic button, it's when they have both an elevated glucose and an elevated ketone. And there are rare exceptions to that, but it is, it's people pushing too hard, too fast is when who is the person who makes this mistake that I'm so worried about, that I've seen in the past, where you can actually get a euglycemic, meaning a normal blood sugar ketosis state. And that is, they're making so many shifts so quickly and not having their medications managed by a professional at the same time. So there is a place for that warning.
Yeah, I just in our workshop yesterday, I told people, I was like, you can't hurt yourself with this. So please be careful. We are a herd of turtles.
Right. I like that image.
That's what we're going for. It's a herd of turtles. We're going to do this together, and it's going to be awesome. And we're going to take our time, slow and steady, one ketone at a time. So thank you so very much for coming on with me again. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again. I cannot tell you.
I really want to say how much I appreciate you and the support that you're lending other people. I truly am a believer that in a community, we each do our part. And I don't know if this comes from being raised in a small town where the responsibilities for community members was very palpable in my upbringing. And if you didn't show up for events, the events didn't happen. Like, you are a real part of this wheel that is in community. And so when I find that I pour into the people that I connect with and that I have been blessed in my life to be friends with, that then they are able to then nurture the next one or teach the next one. So I wish there were more Amy's of the world teaching other people and really finding a way for that purpose-driven improvement in her health, but purpose-driven nurturing for one another too. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. We will do this again for sure.
You bet. Thank you.